Thank you for coming. It's always nice to be in a room full of readers. And here on stage we have not just one great crime writer, but two, each on top of the game. Ann Cleeves from the UK and Ragnar Jónasson from Iceland. You both have readers worldwide, and you have sold millions of copies. And I know that you, Ragnar, are actually running out of place in your house near Reykjavik to get room for all the editions of your books. You have both won awards more than once. And 6 years ago, you were presented with the Diamond Dagger. It's the highest honor in British crime writing. And Ragnar, in an hour, you will receive the Palle Rosenkrantz prize that you got last year for the Hidden Iceland series about Hulda Hermannsdóttir. Your latest book in Danish is called Outside and is a standalone thriller. And Anne, welcome back to Horsens. You have been here before, some years ago.
Yeah, not speaking to quite so many people though. This is a bit impressive.
You've been writing for more than 30 years, and several TV series are based on your wonderful stories. You're known for your Shetland series, for your North Devon series, and also the series featuring the much-loved police inspector Vera Stanhope. And book number 3 about Vera is out in Danish now. And I know that you here at Krimimessen will talk about your new books more. But just before we start, just put a few words on your new novel in Danish, because for the next half hour we will be talking about settings, about strong protagonists, and also about the crime genre in general. But just put a few words on your new book in Danish. Would you start?
Yeah. So the new book is called Ude, or Outside, and it is a standalone, and it's 4 friends who go to the Icelandic highlands hunting in the middle of November, which is always a bad idea. It's the weather is bad, and it's a dangerous place to go. And so the whole story, it has no policeman, no policewoman. It's just these 4 friends fighting each other and fighting the weather. And once they enter this cabin in the highlands, there is something very unexpected waiting for them when they open the door, and that sets off the story. And when I wrote this story, the story just came to me, and I felt I had to write it. I was planning to do something very different, but I took aside time and did this book a year or so ago. And it was, for me, the challenge was just to write a whole story that just takes place over the course of almost just 24 hours. Almost all of it in the same location with just 4 characters, and we switch between narratives.
Yeah, because in many ways it's actually a tight told story, because the drama takes place inside the character's head and not in action-packed scenes. So 4 friends in the middle of nowhere in Iceland. Da 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 da. And Anne, a few words on Hidden Depths, the book number 3 about Vera.
Yeah, Hidden Depths was triggered because I decided I needed to get fit, and I started going swimming. But I did spend more time in the steam room, in the sauna, than in the pool. And if it's very hot, it's very steamy, and you can't really see very much. You can see shadowy figures who are also sitting there waiting. And so I thought Vera, who's rather large, needed to get fit too. So I had her, she had to swim, and so she started swimming, and then she goes into the steam room, and there's a very still person sitting there. Only that very still person is dead. And that person turns out to be a social worker, and we look at her background, why people might have wanted to kill her. And it's set in rural Northumberland, so rural north of England, very small communities where people know each other's secrets, and it seems that this social worker has a lot of secrets. And that's how it starts.
But Hidden Depths was actually the first novel to be broadcast. I mean, the TV series Vera
That's
starts
right.
with Hidden Depths. And maybe it's because Vera appears quite late in your first novel about her.
Yes.
Please, can you just tell us a bit about the first time that Vera appeared?
Of course.
Because
Yeah, Vera first appears in the book called The Crow Trap, and that's available here too. And I had a new, very trendy editor in my UK publishers, and she decided that she didn't want to publish traditional crime fiction anymore. What she wanted was big, standalone psychological novels. And so I thought I could do that. At this point, I had no commercial success at all. I would have written whatever she wanted. And this is what she wanted. So I started writing this book about 3 women who were up in the Northumberland Hills. They were doing an environmental survey before the creation of a huge new quarry. So they were kind of eco-warriors. And one of them was going to die. I wasn't moving that far away from the mystery genre, so one of them was going to die. But then I'd never plot in advance. I didn't know what was going to happen. I got very, very stuck. And it was the American thriller writer Raymond Chandler who said, if you're stuck with a story, have a guy burst through a door with a gun. I'm British, I don't do guns. But I thought I would just see who came in. So I was writing a funeral...
Follow the feet.
Yeah, writing a funeral scene. I had the door burst open, and in came Vera Stanhope, looking more... And I've looked back at the notes, looking more like a bag lady than a detective, carrying all her notes in a supermarket plastic bag. And that's how Vera came to be born. So luck, really.
Dressed a bit like Columbo, perhaps.
Yeah, in the TV show. She's not as well dressed in the book.
I would like to ask you how you started writing, because Ragnar, you have a law degree, you work as an investment banker, and you teach copyright law at the university in Reykjavik, and you have had a lot of temporary jobs before you started writing. So, what happened?
And while I was writing too. Ragnar, you go.
Ragnar.
Yeah, so I have always been writing really. I mean, ever since I was maybe 6 years old or something. And I was, when I was.
What did you write back then?
Short stories, poetry, yeah? And even crime stories. When I was probably 12 or 13, I was doing my own series of crime stories set in the UK, of course, and these were like handwritten in books that I will never publish anywhere. But it was from reading Agatha Christie, and that told me this was something I really enjoyed.
Did you read Agatha Christie when you were 11?
Oh yeah.
Oh,
yes. Yeah. And so it was always there. And then when I was a teenager, I did short stories for magazines, and I did translations. And
yeah, you actually did started when you were 17 to
yes.
translate all I don't know all of them, but Agatha Christie's novels into Icelandic.
Yeah, so I was 17. I had this idea that I could maybe translate the whole book. My mother drove me to the publisher of Agatha Christie in Iceland, and I asked him, can I try and translate the book? And he knew who I was because I had been I'd been calling the publisher every year when I was like 13, 14, 15, asking them, what's the new Agatha Christie translation? So because I was so excited to read. So he knew I was a big fan.
Yeah.
And he gave me this opportunity. And I did that for more than 10 years when I was in school and in law school and when I was working. I stopped it when I started writing my own books. But so it wasn't a big decision to write books. But still it sort of is, because a whole novel is something you think it's so hard to do, and
But one thing is to translate a novel, another thing is to write it.
It is
yourself.
very different. But translating a book gives you the practice. You know how long it will take to actually write down, 60,000 words or whatever it is, and it sort of makes it a little bit easier. But of course, it's always a big challenge to do the first book and just to put it out there and see what people think. It is, it's a barrier. But once I started that and my publisher wanted another book, it was sort of no turning back, because it's what I love to do.
Yeah, and I know that in Iceland that you're crazy about books. I have some Icelandic friends, and it seems like they're all related to a writer or write themselves, or at least they buy a lot of books, because Christmas and books go hand in hand in Iceland. I mean, they're crazy. So
Yeah. Absolutely.
So,
we love our books.
And Anne, how did you get started writing?
I think I was always going to be a storyteller. Before I could read and write, I can remember having, age 2, 3, 4, a running narrative in my head in the third person, describing what I was doing. So exploring the world through story from very, very young. And I've met other writers too who that happened to. And then once I started reading and writing, that stopped. But always reading. But unlike Ragnar, I didn't have the confidence or the contacts to think that anybody would want to read what I'd written. But soon after we married, my husband works in conservation, and we lived on a tiny island, a tidal island called Hilbury, and he was the warden of this nature reserve. We were the only people living there. We had no mains water, no mains electricity, and if you're not into birds, and I'm really not into birds, then there's not a lot else to do. And so that's when I started writing, and I had the time, and never thought that it would at all it would be published. But my comfort reading had always been crime fiction, mystery fiction. And it's perhaps not a coincidence that in that first book I kill off a bird watcher.
A Bird in the Hand, your first book from 86 is called. And considering that you're not too keen on looking on birds, there are quite many birds and bird watchers in your books.
Yeah,
also in the hidden depths.
Yes, and I met my husband on Fair Isle, which is one of the Shetland Islands, and I've been going back to Shetland for more than 40 years. So I am passionate about the places, if not particularly about the birds that you find there.
As a British crime writer, and do you think that you stand on the shoulders of all the authors of the Golden Age?
Yeah, I think so.
In which way? I mean, because Britain have had such a big impact on the genre.
It does, absolutely. And I'm really sorry, Ragnar, but I am not a huge fan of Agatha Christie. I think she's quite cruel and ruthless. She killed schoolgirls without a moment's qualm. She wrote serial killers before they were quite so fashionable. But I love people like Dorothy Sayers, Josephine Tay, Marjorie Allingham. I love those books.
But does it mean anything for you as a writer that you come from this
absolutely.
country that has
and then
all
moving
these traditions?
forwards, when I was first started writing and reading more, there was P.D. James, Phyllis James, and Ruth Rendell, two huge names in British crime writing, and they brought the Christie tradition and made it contemporary and wrote so beautifully, especially P.D. James, I think. So yes, very much standing on those shoulders. And then along came a new wave with Ian Rankin and John Harvey, and suddenly I saw I didn't have to write about a very rich, wealthy amateur sleuth. I could write about things that I knew about because I'd worked in social work and for the probation service. So I could write about criminal justice and poverty in the city as well as writing about the more traditional crime fiction.
But on your website, you have written a letter to your younger self,
yes,
saying that there are also some wonderful European writers, and I know that you like Fred Vargas and Sjöwall and Wahlöö also. So they have also kind of have influence on the way you...
Actually, especially the Nordics, because I read Arnaldur Indridason long before I think most other people had heard of him in the UK, and some of the Scandinavian writers, but yes, the Southern European writers too. And I love that sense of place and of travelling vicariously. And during lockdown with COVID, wasn't it a boon to be able to read about other places and to travel in your mind, in your head, even if you couldn't go to those places?
And I know, Ragnar, for you, that Agatha Christie actually has had a big influence on your writing. Tell us how, and what was it that she was so good at, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I think she is an influence on probably all writers in one way or the other, because she was so big and so influential. And some people say that she used all the best tricks because she has all the the most clever endings. And I think that is true in a way. I mean, she did use a lot of of the unique plot twists, and but she created fantastic plots, of course, and she always had this twist at the end, which I think is is quite important for a crime story.
You also have that in your novels.
I hope so.
Always a twist.
Yeah, that cheap
wonderful,
thrill
and
of the
especially
surprise ending.
in Outside.
If you can do it, it's wonderful, isn't it?
It is. It's a lot of fun, and so I like that. And I think Christy did the setting so well. She did, of course he traveled a lot with the Orient Express, the Nile, but even using the setting of the UK, these old country houses and these small villages, and she did that perfectly. So I think you learn a lot from that.
But don't we often read stories because we want to read about people and see how they solve a problem? I mean, how they improve upon their flaws and all that. Did they do that in the old Agatha Christie's? I mean, Poirot and Miss Marple, did they develop throughout a story or
I
through
think,
the course of the
yeah,
story?
I mean, I
Didn't
think
they just start exactly the same place in a new novel?
I think Christie developed quite a bit throughout the stories. I mean, of course, as you know, I mean, Poirot and Marple, they didn't really age, not a lot, of course, but he gets a little bit older and then he dies at the end of the career, but you have to sort of accept that he doesn't age in line with the time. But the stories, they are a little bit contemporary. I mean, she's writing war stories during the war, and then in the 50s, 60s, she's trying to write more sort of contemporary, British crime fiction. So I think at least she tried to adapt.
And today perhaps it's more about why done it than who done it.
Yeah. I think so. But I like Ragnar. I think it's great if we can get some sort of. I talk about it a bit as a bit of psychological archaeology, where you dig back into a person's past to try and explain who they are now. But still, when you get that real surprise twist at the end, it's still such a treat that I love as a reader. And if you can get that and get the psychological depth, that's the
quite good at that, both of you.
That's the sweet spot, I think.
And even though you come from two different crime writing traditions, I think you have a lot in common, because you often write about nature and the landscape, take up a lot of space in your novels. So, Anne, the last sentence in your first Not Devon's crime novel, The Long Call, Dead on the Beach, it's called in Danish, is "and the seagull screamed." And in that book, you describe the marshland, the sea, the tide, the cliffs, the river. And Ragnar, your new novel in Danish, it starts with, "It was freezing cold." So there you have it, the rough Icelandic weather. How do you choose a setting, and how important is the right setting for a novel?
I always start with a setting. I know when the book's going to be set before I know anything else about it. My daughter's an academic. She's a human geographer, looking at the individual within their community and within the landscape. And I hope that's what I do too, that I'm looking at, I think we are a product of where we come from. So we are the kids that we played in the street with, and the view from our bedroom windows, and the school that we went to, and the friends that we made. And I think all that links into who we are. So I need to know where the book's set before I can start writing about it. And I've worked mostly with 3 settings, so the Shetland Islands right up to the north, and then North Devon you're talking about, which is a sort of seaside, fairly idyllic setting, but it's where I grew up, and where I went to school and first fell in love and had beach parties and listened to people play guitar, and so feel very, very fond about that setting too. So it's about place, and it's about how people grow out of place, I think.
Ragnar?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I start with the setting as well, and especially if the books are set outside of Reykjavik, I put a lot of effort into trying to find the right place. I mean, for this new book, it is a cabin in the Highlands, and it's not necessarily a particular cabin, but I know, I've been up there, and I know sort of how the feeling is to stay in the cold in the small hut, with nothing outside, and for some of the novels, I've just actually looked for a. But
you also have
location.
a novel called The Girl Who Died.
Yeah.
Byen,
Byen,
it is called in Danish, and you're up in Skavlar.
Exactly, and that was for for that book, I just wanted to go as far away from Reykjavik as possible, and I wanted like a place with some history. And I just did some research, and that was just a place I found during my research. It was a village that had been a thriving village during the war, and no one lives there anymore. It's just ruins. And I went up there, and I went into these old houses. No one lives there anymore, and that was like
and
the
novel is
perfect
set
place.
in the 80s, and they didn't have cell phones, so...
Yes, I love that.
I mean, you're really isolated out there.
I love the isolation, and I love the 80s without the cell phones, without the Wi-Fi.
But it can still be a matter of life and death if you're out in the rough area in Iceland. But I mean, you're living in Reykjavik. How have you ever been in a dangerous situation yourself? Because you write about this.
Yeah.
And sometimes in nature, more or less become a main character.
Yeah.
In line with your other characters.
I mean, the nature in Iceland can be quite dangerous, and it's a huge country, and we only live around the coastline, so the biggest part of Iceland is just isolated. It's just the highlands, and if you go up there, whatever time of year, if you get lost, you can die. I mean, even if it's in the height of summer, because it's high up and gets cold, and every year we have a lot of people that get lost, and we have the helicopters looking for them.
And in your books, the characters always get in that situation.
Of course,
but have you been tried
no,
that
I
yourself?
have not really. I mean, I think I try to be more careful. But I've been to I did once do a trip to a cabin in the Highlands with a friend of mine, and because I was researching for a book, and he, I asked him to find a place that we could visit, and he drove me there over ice and snow, and then we walked for half an hour in very deep snow, always falling into the snow, and finally we found this cabin, and we spent the night there in freezing cold, and of course there was no...
And it's not just -2 degrees, it's...
No, it's just... and when it's not isolated and not heated, I mean, you just, you go into your sleeping bag and you just put your head as far in as you can, just try and breathe a little bit and stay warm, and that was, of course, was not a dangerous trip, but it was a nice experience to feel. And then when we woke up the day after, I was really, dreading the trip back, because I knew we would have to walk for half an hour or more in the snow, in the cold, again to find the car. And then we walked out of the cabin, and I was going to turn right like we did, and my friend said, "No, this time we turn left." And it turned out the car was next to the cabin, and he just tricked me into walking a long distance. But that was good research.
I hope I can... one more question, please, and a short answer, perhaps. What is a good protagonist, hovedperson?
Somebody who's a bit complex and a bit interesting, and who the reader wants to know more about. That's short.
Yes?
Yeah, I think, I think readers, for crime novels and whatever type of books, if it's a series, I think you always come back to the stories for the main character, not for the plots. So if the main character doesn't interest you, doesn't have depth, I think you won't return to the book. So I think, it's basically, you have to have a character with some story to tell.
And you did some very special with Hulda Hermannsdottir in your trilogy, that you told her story backwards. In the first book, she's 64, then she's 50, and then she's 40. That was excellent done.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Time is running, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.